Hi, I'm Elizabeth Bamberger and I live here at Morano Senior Residences in Seattle.
Hi, I'm Mike. I also live here. As you guessed from the accent, we're from England.
The title of our show is called Journeys, a reflection on a lifetime of travel. We have always loved to travel. When we were growing up in England, after the Second World War, our travels were limited to things like hiking and youth hosteling. And if we went abroad, it was to nearby countries like France and Germany, which at the time seemed extremely exotic to us. Since then, we've been very lucky and had the opportunity to travel many different places in different parts of the world. And that has very much fed our art. A year after we married, we moved to Venezuela in 1965, supposedly for 18 months. We ended up living there for 10 years and then another 3 years in El Salvador before moving to the States. And we were very fortunate that we were working with a group called Acción, which worked in the urban slums of Caracas, and with a mixed group of people, mainly Venezuelans, some foreigners. And so we got to know the countries where we lived in a very different way than if we were just tourists or if we were with big commercial companies, because we were very much in close touch with the communities where we worked, and that gave us a very different perspective.
In addition to our opportunities to travel, live in Venezuela and El Salvador, I was then fortunate to get a job with the World Bank, which involved me in travel to Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Elizabeth was able to come with me on a lot of trips. She visited the project, she got to know the communities I was working with. With this more deeper understanding, we realized that as you get to know a community or a country, your understanding completely changes. When you're a tourist, you just see the beautiful countryside, the images. The more you're there, you begin to understand the challenges people are facing. And so in the work, we've tried to combine the beautiful images, the fascinating history, but also understanding the kinds of challenges and problems that people are facing. And so we're very fortunate we actually worked in a number of countries, living with people, and so we feel we sort of have an understanding and something perhaps to contribute through our art. The first piece is a wooden sculpture from Brazil called The Wanderer, or Bandeirantes. This is inspired in the northeast of Brazil. There's a lot of songs about when there's a drought and people have to leave the village because they're no longer able to grow their crops. And so they migrate to the cities where they essentially end up working almost as slaves for very, very low wages. And some of the songs talk about the asa branca, which is the white dove. And when the drought is coming, the white dove leaves the village. And a lot of the songs say very sadly, will the white dove ever come back again? So we thought this is an interesting way of talking about environment and climate change. This is called Shetani, which is the mischievous elf of the forest. The Shetani is not evil, but it comes and steals eggs from your chickens and so on. The Shetani always has a chameleon on her shoulders, and it's very like the European witch, which has the cat. I really like this piece because it's inspired by the Makonde sculptors from originally from Tanzania, and I think it's the most beautiful, technically kind of wood sculpture which I'm familiar with. And so one of the reasons we put this into the show is we're trying to focus on the challenges and constraints which poor people have in improving their conditions. And one of these constraints is the sort of magical forces which people feel constrain them. So in this case, the Shetani is in the forest, and if you don't sort of respect them, they will cause you problems. And so many of the cultures, particularly for the rural people, have these kinds of constraints on them, the gods you have to respect, mischievous forces in the forest. This piece is called Sunset. It's inspired by a bar in Rio de Janeiro called Sunset, and it shows a young woman who is from the northeast of the country. Very large numbers of people migrated from the northeast because there was no work there, and so they came down to the cities like Rio. This piece is called The Journey. It's inspired by Nigerian religious carvings and also metalwork. This shows a king whose favorite wife had died, and he journeys through the netherworld with all of its dangers to re-meet her. And I was particularly fascinated both by the content of the works, but also the very intricate borders of all of the sculptures and the very fascinating way that they actually did the carving. This piece is called Compassion. This is a wire sculpture which I did more recently. It reflects for us the sort of feeling of a lot of this show of how people support each other when they're going through crises. And so this for us represents the fact that all of the communities all around the world we've worked in, this compassion is tremendously strong, that people help each other. In Spanish, you have the phrase, hoy por ti, mañana por mí. Today I can help you, tomorrow you will help me. And I discovered working in the Philippines, they have similar terms in Tagalog. Malasakit is compassion. You help somebody because they can't help themselves. And utang na laob is a social debt. You help people, but at some point your family has to repay. These are just representing the fact that people help each other, in some cases with no expectation of getting any return. I like working in wire for this kind of figure because the wire is very thin and very flexible, so you can really get the feeling of the person sort of crouching over, going through some tremendous sadness in a way you can't do with wood. This is called the Women's Work Day in Morocco. We were working in Morocco and we attended a training course for women where they were all asked to draw images of their daily life. And so I took all of these images and I created a circle of all of the hours of the day and constructed these images of people gathering the wood, taking the goats out to feeding the family. And so this represents the challenges which women in most cultures face. They have such a heavy work burden looking after the family, the farm and so on. It's very difficult for girls to go on to higher education or for women to get more productive work, just because they get up before dawn, they're still working until late at night. So this represents not just Morocco, but many other cultures, just reminding us of the tremendous burdens that women have.
This piece is called City Under Siege. In medieval times, cities were threatened from without by marauding armies. In modern times, they are threatened by internal forces, such as greed, anger, violence, decay, neglect. We need to rethink our cities. We need room to breathe. This piece is called When the Waters Rise. It envisages a dystopian future in which rising sea levels have caused major changes to many communities who live near the seas or near lakes or near rivers. These two pieces are called Moondrops and Sunspots. A place first seen in the bright light of sun may take on a totally different feel if we see the same place in moonlight. These small abstract pieces try to capture this transformation. This piece is called Where the City Meets the High Desert. In the background we see the tall buildings of a modern city, They gradually merge into the foreground of the towering, colorful rock formations of the high desert in Oregon, which is one of my favorite places. And they're two very different places, but I see similarities between the tall city buildings and the towering rock formations of the high desert. This piece is called Voices of the Ancestors. I was very impressed by the funeral pole made by the Aboriginal peoples of the Tiwi Islands, just off the north coast of Australia. They revealed to me something of how these people lived and what materials they used, and I was inspired to make this piece, which tries to show what remains of earlier cultures and what we can learn from those remaining traces. For example, paths that remain show us how these people moved across the earth, crumbling buildings perhaps, or little houses. Other traces of the earlier civilizations may have been eroded by wind or rain or sun, but some of those traces remain and can easily describe to us some of the ways these people lived. This piece is called My Kind of Town. It reflects so many elements, small and traditional towns and villages that we have seen in many countries across the world. And that includes the adobe houses and traditional constructions. The materials eventually will fade back into the landscape without, for example, leaving ugly piles of concrete and steel, as many of our modern buildings do. The other things that appeal to me is the wonkiness of some of the elements. Not all the windows are square cut. The houses have curves, soft curves, which appeals to me. The cobblestone or stone streets are connecting a series of winding pathways and staircases. The whole thing to me is on a much more human scale that appeals to me much more than the enormous seas of concrete that we see in many of our modern Western cities. Three common themes in our work. As we worked together on the preparation of this show, we recognized three underlying themes that influenced much of our work.
Environmental challenges. As the effects of climate change spread around the world, the poor are most affected, partly because they suffer the effects of power-hungry development policies and also because they are not included in many climate mitigation policies.
Social support networks. In all the low-income communities that we have visited, most families rely on support from neighbors and relatives to help them through hard times. There is a phrase in Spanish, hoy por ti, mañana por mí. Today I am able to help you, tomorrow you will help me. On a different level, interactions between communities or societies have the potential to benefit everyone.
Voyaging through time and space. Our travels have taken us around the world, and the art we have encountered has inspired journeys back through time in our imagination. We shared three pieces whose origins vanish into the mists of history.